At first, Reggie didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just a one-time thing, a small inconvenience. The sleek silver Lexus parked in his driveway could have been a mistake, an innocent oversight. She probably had guests over, he told himself, tossing his keys into the bowl by the door. They probably had to shuffle cars around. No big deal. He let it go, but then it happened again, and again, and again. Each time, Blythe had an excuse ready, something just believable enough to avoid confrontation. Just dropping something off. Just running inside for a second. She'd flash that practiced smile, tight-lipped and polished, like the ones you wear in a boardroom when you're pretending to listen. Her manicured hand would wave him off like she was swatting a fly. Reggie would nod, swallow the frustration building inside him, and park on the street. He wasn't the kind of man who liked to stir up drama. He'd lived in the neighborhood for years, kept to himself, paid his dues, mowed his lawn on Saturdays. Peace was valuable. But peace, he was starting to realize, came at a cost. And Blythe was collecting her toll one entitled parking job at a time. Then came that day. Reggie had just finished an exhausting shift at the school, grading papers, breaking up hallway arguments, standing on his feet for 8 hours straight. All he wanted was to collapse on the couch and inhale whatever leftovers were still in the fridge. But as he turned onto his quiet suburban street, there it was again. The Lexus, parked dead center in his driveway like it belonged there. Like he didn't. He slammed the brakes and sat there for a moment, staring. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. His jaw clenched. The sun was sinking, casting long shadows across the lawn, and the only thing darker than the dusk was the storm brewing in his chest. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was disregard, pure and deliberate. He got out of the car, his footsteps heavy against the pavement. When he knocked on her door, she answered with the kind of smug, condescending tone that made his blood boil. "Reggie, what's wrong?" she asked, faux concern dripping from every syllable. He pointed at the car. Her eyes widened in mock surprise, and she laughed. Laughed. It was in that moment, as her eyes rolled and her wine glass twirled lazily in her hand, that Reggie realized this wasn't going to stop. Not unless he made it stop. This wasn't about a driveway anymore. It was about respect, and he was done giving it to someone who offered none in return. Reggie had always believed that civility mattered, that if you asked nicely, spoke with reason, gave people the benefit of the doubt, they would respond in kind. But Blythe Vanderholt wasn't most people. And with every knock on her door, every calm request to please not park in his driveway again, Reggie felt that belief begin to crack. It started with politeness. "Hey, Blythe," he'd say with a steady voice, nodding toward her Lexus sprawled across his property. "I really need you to stop leaving your car in my driveway." Her response? A breezy laugh, a dismissive wave, and a line that sounded rehearsed. "Oh, Reggie, relax. I was just there for 2 minutes. You weren't even home." She always said that like it was supposed to excuse everything, like his driveway only mattered when he was physically standing in it. The more he asked, the more patronizing she became. Each time she'd widen her eyes like he was the irrational one. "Are you really getting worked up over a piece of pavement?" she scoffed once, wine glass dangling from her fingers. "You always park on the street anyway." That comment hit harder than she knew, because it wasn't just a driveway anymore. It was a boundary, one she kept crossing with a smug smirk and the unspoken belief that her convenience mattered more than his ownership. He tried everything short of shouting. Notes, gone without acknowledgement. Texts, ignored. Knocks, answered with feigned surprise and passive aggression. Once, when he caught her red-handed and demanded she move her car immediately, she took a full 20 minutes to call her friend to come get it, sipping Chardonnay like she was doing him a favor. The worst part wasn't the act itself, it was the tone, the condescension, the barely disguised contempt in her voice every time she said, "You don't mind, do you?" Reggie did mind. He minded a lot, but Blythe treated him like he was invisible, like the line between their properties didn't exist, like his requests were just minor annoyances interrupting her perfectly manicured life. Each encounter chipped away at Reggie's patience, not with fire, but with ice. A slow, bitter frost that spread across his gut, numbing the space where tolerance used to live. And yet each time he held back, because that's who he was, or at least who he had been. But something was changing. Reggie could feel it in his chest, in his tightening fists, in the quiet fury building behind his eyes. The next time she laughed, the next time she waved him off like a child throwing a tantrum, he wouldn't ask again. Because this wasn't just disrespect. It was a declaration. Your boundaries mean nothing to me. And Reggie was finally ready to answer. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when Reggie pulled onto his street and saw it. Again, Blythe's Lexus RX, sitting in his driveway like a smug declaration of power. But this time it wasn't just the usual parking violation. No, this time she had angled it carelessly, blocking his garage like she owned the place. That was the last straw. There were no more chances, no more polite requests, no more notes tucked under wipers. Tonight, Reggie wasn't asking. He was acting. He didn't even go to her door. Instead, he parked a few houses down, pulled out his phone, and calmly dialed the number he had saved for weeks, Sunshine Towing. When the dispatcher answered, his voice was calm, too calm. Yes, I need a vehicle towed from my property, he said. A silver Lexus RX. No permission, no warning, just get it gone. Within 20 minutes, the rumble of the tow truck echoed down the quiet suburban lane. Reggie stood on his porch, arms folded, watching like a man who had waited a long, long time for this moment. The tow driver stepped out, took one look at the car, and asked the only question that mattered. Got proof of ownership? Reggie nodded, holding out a copy of his deed like it was a royal decree. She's parked on my land, he said. That was all the driver needed. Metal clanked. Chains tightened. The back of the truck tilted as the Lexus was lifted into the air, her tires spinning for the last time on Reggie's driveway. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, just watched, stone-faced, as the SUV disappeared down the street, taillights glowing like justice in motion. But the peace didn't last long. An hour later, bam, 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 his front door rattled beneath the fury of Blythe Vanderholt's fists. She was furious, wild hair, pajama pants, and murder in her eyes. Where is my car? She barked, holding her phone like a weapon. Reggie opened the door slowly, calmly, and tilted his head. Towed, he said flatly. Her jaw dropped. You what? You heard me. You can't do that, she shrieked. I'm on the HOA board. I have connections. Reggie didn't even blink. Your car's at Sunshine Towing off Orange Blossom Trail. Have a good night. But she wasn't done. She called the police, fury boiling over. When the officers arrived, Blythe pounced like a prosecutor. He had my vehicle towed without permission, she screamed. The officer turned to Reggie. Sir, is that your driveway? Reggie handed over his deed. Yes. You had her car removed from your own property? That's right. The officer looked at Blythe. Ma'am, he's within his rights. The look on her face, that split-second flicker of disbelief, of power slipping through her fingers, was worth every second. She stormed off, humiliated. But Reggie knew one thing for sure. This war wasn't over. It was only beginning. Reggie had thought towing Blythe's car would be the end of it. A message she couldn't ignore, a boundary finally reinforced. But he had underestimated just how deeply entitled Blythe Vanderholt truly was. Because for someone like her, losing wasn't an option. It was a personal affront. And if she couldn't win with a Lexus in his driveway, she'd try something far more insidious. Control the narrative. It started subtly. A note taped to Reggie's front door, written in bright red marker, as if the color alone gave it authority. This is a community. We should all strive to be more neighborly. No signature, no explanation, just a passive-aggressive slap in the face pretending to be civility. Reggie crumpled it without a second thought. Then came the letters. The HOA, a body once weaponized by Blythe's charm and board seat, began sending violation notices. Reggie blinked in disbelief as he read the first one. Your front porch plants do not conform to community aesthetic standards. The same two ferns that had sat there peacefully for 2 years were suddenly problematic. A week later, your trash bins remained on the curb longer than allowed. Then, mailbox paint chipping. It was laughable, petty, transparent. But each letter carried the weight of bureaucracy of a system she once ruled. And then, as if notes and letters weren't enough, she escalated. One evening, Reggie was watering his front lawn when a white security SUV rolled up, lights flashing like he was robbing his own home. A tall officer stepped out, adjusting his belt like he was preparing for confrontation. Sir, do you live here? He asked. Reggie narrowed his eyes. Yeah. Why? We received a call about suspicious activity. Reggie turned his head, and there she was, Blythe, standing on her porch, arms crossed, the picture of faux concern. She didn't wave, didn't speak, just stared, smug and silent. The officer looked uncomfortable as Reggie handed over his ID and calmly said, "I'm watering my grass." The officer nodded, clearly embarrassed. "Right, sorry to bother you." But that wasn't the worst part. The next morning, flyers appeared, laminated, color printed, taped to every single mailbox in the neighborhood. Is this who we are now? Towing our neighbors instead of speaking to them? What happened to kindness? No name, but everyone knew. Reggie tore the flyer from his mailbox, shaking his head in disbelief. Yet through all of it, he never flinched, because something had changed. Blythe wasn't winning. She was unraveling. Her desperation was showing. And while she tried to paint him as the villain, the cracks in her performance were widening. Neighbors began whispering. Some even texted him directly. "Don't let her get to you, man. She tried to fine me $200 for wind chimes once." Another, "If she parks in your driveway again, I'll help pay for the tow." Reggie smiled at that one, because Blythe thought she was isolating him, but all she had really done was rally the entire neighborhood against her. Reggie had spent weeks feeling like the villain in a story he never asked to be part of. The flyers, the anonymous notes, the security patrols, all carefully orchestrated to paint him as the unreasonable neighbor, the one who towed instead of talking. But something shifted, and it didn't start with a confrontation. It started with a text. "Hey man, saw the flyer. She's ridiculous. We're with you." It came from a neighbor 2 houses down, a quiet guy who usually kept to himself. Then another, "She tried to fine me for having a wind chime on my porch. A wind chime, bro." Then another. By midday, Reggie's phone was lighting up like fireworks on the 4th of July. Hushed sympathies became open conversations. Neighbors who had once nodded politely at him in passing were now stopping to talk, to vent, to rally. "She fined me $75 because my garden hose was coiled the wrong way," one woman muttered, arms crossed. "She called the HOA on my nephew for wearing a hoodie," said another, visibly still fuming. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been holding their breath for years, walking on eggshells around Blythe Vanderholt's rule. She had been the unofficial queen of the HOA, doling out citations like candy, correcting porch decorations, measuring lawn lengths like a tyrant with a ruler. But now, for the first time, the spell had broken. Reggie, simply by standing up, had cracked the image she built. At the next HOA meeting, Reggie decided to attend, not out of protest, but out of principle. He walked in, head held high, and sat directly across from her. Blythe didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his presence, but her posture said everything. Her shoulders were tight. Her fingers drummed nervously on the table. She could feel it. The tide was turning. The meeting started the usual way: budget updates, community reminders, landscaping requests. But then a voice cleared its throat. An older board member leaned forward. "We've received multiple concerns about misuse of HOA authority," she said calmly. "Specifically, harassment of residents, unauthorized communications, and personal retaliation." The room froze. Blythe sat up straight, lips parting. "I'm sorry, what?" The woman didn't blink. "These concerns are about you, Blythe." A low murmur ran through the room. Heads turned. Whispers exchanged. Reggie watched her carefully, seeing the cracks form in real time. For the first time, she wasn't in control. And she knew it. Outside the meeting, neighbors gathered around him. Some patted him on the back. Others simply nodded in solidarity. One man chuckled. "You know, I used to think I was the only one she targeted, but it turns out we all were." Reggie felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: vindicated. Blythe had spent years building her kingdom on silence and fear, but now her people were speaking, loudly, clearly, and they were standing with Reggie. Reggie had never cared much for HOA meetings. They were usually a tedious symphony of landscaping budgets, recycling reminders, and debates about mailbox colors. But this one felt different. As he buttoned his shirt and stepped out the door, he wasn't just a man walking into a community hall. He was walking into a reckoning. The room was already buzzing when he arrived. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved him over. People he barely knew were nodding, smiling, even saving him a seat. And right across the room, sitting stiff and poised like nothing was wrong, was Blythe Vanderholt. Her usual air of superiority seemed thinner tonight, fragile, like a porcelain mask with hairline cracks. The meeting began like any other, old business, upcoming events, a reminder not to leave trash cans out overnight. But then a silence fell. The chairwoman cleared her throat and looked directly at Blythe. "We need to address a serious matter brought forth by multiple residents," she said. "A formal complaint has been filed, several in fact, regarding the misuse of HOA resources, harassment, and retaliatory actions carried out by a member of this board." Blythe shifted in her seat, but her face stayed composed. "Who exactly are these complaints against?" she asked, her tone icy. The chairwoman didn't blink. "You, Blythe." The silence cracked like thunder. Murmurs rippled through the room. Reggie watched her posture change, shoulders rising, jaw tightening. "This is absurd," she scoffed. "I've only ever acted in the best interest of this community." A younger board member leaned forward. "Calling security on a man watering his lawn? Filing anonymous complaints about plants, trash bins, mailbox paint, posting flyers without approval?" He shook his head. "That's not leadership. That's harassment." Blythe's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. But no one met her gaze. Her kingdom had grown quiet. "These actions violate the ethics agreement every board member signs," the chairwoman continued. "And given the volume of complaints and supporting evidence, we have no choice." "No choice?" Blythe snapped. "You're going to take his side?" "We're taking the community's side," the older board member replied calmly. "This isn't personal. It's accountability." Reggie sat still, arms crossed, watching her unravel. She opened her mouth to protest again, but nothing came out. Her voice, once the loudest in the room, now sounded hollow, powerless. The final motion was put to vote. One by one, hands went up. Not a single vote in her favor. Blythe Vanderholt, once the queen of the HOA, was officially removed from the board. When Reggie stepped out into the cool night air, neighbors followed, clapping him on the back, thanking him. But he didn't smile for long. He knew this wasn't the end. People like Blythe didn't go quietly. Still, for the first time in months, the balance had shifted, and justice, true, public, undeniable, had finally taken the floor. Reggie knew Blythe wouldn't go quietly. The vote to remove her from the HOA board had shaken her, but it hadn't broken her. Not yet. He expected cold glares, whispered insults, maybe even another flyer or two. What he didn't expect was his trash cans to vanish. It was a Thursday morning when he first noticed. Reggie stood at the end of his driveway, coffee in hand, staring at the empty space where his bins had been. They weren't tipped over. They weren't misplaced. They were just gone. He scanned the street, confusion turning to suspicion, and then, there behind Blythe's house, 2 green bins stacked neatly like trophies. His trophies. Reggie let out a stunned laugh, the kind that starts in disbelief and ends in slow-burning anger. "She stole my trash cans," he muttered to himself. It was childish, petty, completely deranged. But it was also proof. Blythe had gone from manipulating the system to stealing garbage bins. He pulled out his phone and snapped several clear photos, making sure the house, the bins, and her property line were all in the frame. Then, calm as ever, he walked across the yard and knocked on her door. This time he wasn't furious. He was ready. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a very different Blythe. No smug smile, no wine glass in hand. Just tired eyes, a pale face, and the look of someone who already knew they'd lost. Reggie raised his phone. "You want to tell me why my trash cans are in your backyard?" She crossed her arms. "I don't know what you're talking about." Reggie chuckled, holding up the screen. "Don't lie. I've got the photos. We don't need to pretend anymore." For a moment there was silence. Blythe's lips trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that this time there was no HOA to hide behind, no security to weaponize, no excuses left to throw. "You've lost," Reggie said simply. "You can't find me. You can't file false reports. You can't bully your way through this neighborhood anymore." She stared at him, hollow. "You don't know what you're doing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, I do," Reggie replied. "And tomorrow I'm filing a formal complaint with photographic evidence, theft of property, harassment, misuse of HOA authority." Blythe shut the door in silence. True to his word, the next morning Reggie submitted the complaint, complete with timestamps, witness statements, and images. Within the week, the HOA had no choice. Not only had she been voted off the board, but her privileges in the community were revoked. No more meetings, no more influence, no more power. She didn't speak to Reggie again. No apologies, no glares, just silence. But a few weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. And Reggie, he finally had his driveway and his peace. When the for sale sign finally appeared on Blythe Vanderholt's perfectly manicured lawn, Reggie didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply stood on his porch, hands in his pockets, and let the quiet settle over him like a warm coat. It wasn't joy he felt. It was relief. The kind of deep, unshakable peace that only comes after months of tension finally dissolve into silence. No more Lexus in his driveway. No more phony smiles, condescending notes, or bogus HOA violations. Blythe was leaving, and with her, she was taking the chaos she had carefully crafted for years. The neighborhood didn't react with sympathy. If anything, there was a sense of collective exhale. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. Reggie had done what no one else dared. He stood up. And once he did, the rest of the community followed. It wasn't just about a parking spot anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity, about setting boundaries and making sure they meant something. Some said Blythe was leaving out of shame. Others believed she couldn't stand being powerless in the neighborhood she once ruled. But Reggie didn't care why she was going, only that she was. And as the moving trucks loaded box after box, as curtains were drawn and doors slammed shut, Reggie stayed inside. He didn't need to watch her go. She was already gone. It wasn't until the last truck pulled away that he stepped out onto his porch. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the quiet street. A couple of kids rode their bikes past his driveway. A neighbor waved. Reggie nodded back, then took a long breath. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt at home in his own home. Neighbors who once avoided speaking up now stopped by to talk. Some shared their own horror stories, fines for having wind chimes, complaints about garden gnomes, even security calls over a hoodie. One man chuckled and said, "You didn't just win for yourself, Reggie. You won for all of us." And he had. Blythe's downfall became local legend, not because of how loudly it happened, but because of how completely it unraveled her carefully constructed image. The queen of HOA, undone not by force, but by one man's refusal to be walked over. She never spoke to him again. No apologies, no final jabs, just silence. And in that silence, Reggie found everything he'd been fighting for. No cars in his driveway. No warnings taped to his door. No fear of retaliation, just peace. And sometimes that's the greatest victory of all. Some people go through life believing that power, privilege, or charm will shield them from consequences. They test boundaries, dismiss kindness, and mistake silence for submission. But eventually, they cross the wrong line or the wrong person. Reggie Carter wasn't looking for conflict. He valued peace, patience, and neighborly respect. But when those values were repeatedly trampled, he stood his ground. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with quiet strength, steady resolve, and undeniable proof. What followed wasn't just personal justice. It was a community awakening. People who had endured mistreatment in silence finally found their voice, inspired by one man who refused to back down. The lesson here is timeless. Standing up for yourself is not about causing trouble. It's about protecting your dignity. And when you do it with grace and clarity, others will rise with you. In a world where bullies often operate behind masks of politeness or power, courage looks like persistence. And justice can begin with something as simple as saying, "This is not okay." No matter your age, it's never too late to reclaim your peace. And sometimes all it takes is one person to remind an entire community what respect truly looks like.